Welcome, Dr. Aimie Apigian, to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Luis. Really excited to be here. My audience has been crazy about you ever since you came. And even just yesterday, one of them was talking to me and she says, Luis has me eating beans 3 times a day now. And so they have just fallen in love with you.
I have to laugh because when I was 15, my dream was that everyone would be asking me for autographs as a musician. And now everywhere I go, it's like, oh, I'm eating beans 3 times a day. It's like, I
That's
didn't know
that's the new version of autograph, Luis.
that's the new
You've reached
version.
it.
I
Congratulations.
thank you for that validation and that reframe. I was so excited to have you on here because when I got to share space with you a few months ago, you're the first trauma therapist I've met that understands nutrition. Truly, and it was so inspiring and exciting. And I thought I want to have a conversation with you around how you got there and also wisdom you can impart for my audience because we have very, very similar audiences. Many of my audience knows you. I've heard beautiful things about you over the last year or two. So I guess I kind of want to start with tell us your journey. Like, what got you into trauma healing in the first place?
Yeah. And to clarify, I am not a therapist. So of all my different degrees, Luis, I'm actually not, therapist is not one of them yet, at least
So
yet.
what do you call it? What's your title? That's a good start. Let's
Yeah,
start.
and that's kind of where I still kind of get surprised because like I'm a medical physician. Like that's what I am. Yes, I have gone through several different trauma therapy trainings, but I went through those as a medical physician. Imagine that, Louise, right? Like sitting in this room full of therapists,
Oh
being a
yeah.
medical physician. And it's just very different backgrounds, very different backgrounds. And that's so my journey started very unexpectedly, I would say. And it was when I really decided to become a foster parent and took in Miguel, who was 4 years old at the time. I was in medical school, just having completed my master's in biochemistry. And I had a few months of space there that I'm like, like, how can my life be more meaningful? Oh, I know. Let me become a foster parent. So um, he was the first one that they placed with me. They ended up placing another one with me as well, but he was the first, and he had a really rough past, really rough. By the time he got to me, he had over 20 different placements. So not like long-term placements, but like move from out of this home into this group home for 3 days. Okay, now we're going to place you here. Now we're going to place you here. So he had been, I mean, dysregulated his whole
Mhm.
entire life. And given what we know about his birth mom, even in utero. And Luis, like I thought that my love would be strong enough to fix him. And I use that word fix not in a like he needed fixing, but that it could undo all of the hard times that he had been through. And what I wanted for him was for him to be able to rise above that and no longer let his past drive his future. And that's exactly what I saw happening. Given his behaviors, his inability to handle emotions, the path that I saw for him led straight to addictions and jail. He was already stealing, so he was constantly stealing from me, lying, very much showing addictive types of behaviors with around food, certainly at least. But then like his brain would just get fixated on things and to try to pull him away from anything, especially a screen. Oh my goodness, it was World War III. And he did try to kill me, and he would talk about how he wanted to kill me. And so his past was very much still driving his life. And that's what I mean when I say that, like I thought that my love would be strong enough to fix that, not fix him, fix that. And it didn't. And Louise, what I had to learn was that because of his history and his life experiences, my connection with him, our relationship actually was the trigger for him. And so the more that I tried to connect and have these heartfelt connections, and they did happen. We would have these amazing moments, and then all hell would break loose, and it would be even worse than it had been before we connected. And so it was, for me as a medical physician, well, at least in training at that time, it was very confusing to me. I did not understand, and that was what became my purpose then is, all right, help me understand, just help me understand what is going on in this little brain, what is going on in this body, because literally when he would get into these triggers, and looking back, Luis, he was constantly dysregulated, constantly, but there would be peaks of that dysregulation. And his body, it looked like his body would just be taken over and be controlled and be out of control. And
Which is
I
essentially
wanted,
what's happening. Yeah, right.
which right now that I understand, like that's exactly what was happening. And I didn't understand that back then. I had been raised and certainly been taught from the conventional medical standpoint that, the brain runs the body. And that's not what I'm seeing.
Nope.
So that's what started my journey, Luis, was wait a second, like everything that I've been taught, my models of understanding humans' behavior are not what I see in front of me. And so everything that I'm doing is not helping. And it is so serious that I have to do something about this.
Mm.
I have to either let him go to some other place. And actually, I did call the state of California, had that conversation with him because at that point, I was exploring all my options, right? Just
Yeah.
tell me my options. And I asked, is it an option to have him go back under the care of the state? And you know what they told me, Louise? Well, if you did, you would be reported for child neglect. Well, that's not an option for me because that, as a
Hmm.
medical physician, would ruin my career. Like I
Hmm.
could not be a doctor with that on my record.
Right.
So that's not an option. And so then it was like this became my all in all at that time was then, all right, then what do I need to do? How do I understand him? And then how do I help him?
See, that's what's,
And
I have to pause you there. This is such a beautiful story. I understand there's a lot of pain in it, but it's so beautiful that you were given this moment where you weren't able to walk away from it. And what I love about that is some people might just kind of cope with it. They just kind of would deal until the day comes or he's old enough or something shifts. But you had something more inquisitive inside of yourself. You were really curious. Okay, what's driving this? I want to understand this. So Miguel really propelled you into this
totally.
work, like your relationship with him.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point because I see many families having done that, just kind of
Yeah.
coping and they're miserable. Everybody's unhappy. The parents almost have to go into this chronic freeze state just to
Hmm.
get through.
Yeah.
And they're counting the days until the child's 18 and they can have them leave the house. But even then, they still live in fear because what if, like the
Hmm.
relationship's obviously not good. And what if they come back and try to harm me?
That's right.
So it's a really tough situation for a lot of families, but you are right. For me, it propelled me to lean in more.
So what I love about you having a medical background, which I actually wish more trauma therapists had, is our therapists in general, is you actually were more body based. And so you didn't come from this place of thinking about like behavior or the mind or the psyche. You were in the body, you were in the biology of people's experiences and food and inflammation and disease and such. How did I want to know what it was like the moment it clicked for you? Oh, trauma is biological. This is not psychological. This is biological. It becomes psychological, but tell me about that. I'm really curious.
Yeah, and that's become my whole career and my message, right? Like the biology of trauma is what I
Yes.
do. And that's what I teach therapists now. Like these are the biology things that you need to know because you're working with the biology when you do therapy. And for me, it started to click when I started looking into the attachment. And Louise, I will say not just attachment, but neurodevelopment. And so neurodevelopment was a piece that I came across from other families who were in the space, and they were doing these neurodevelopmental exercises. And I'm like, you're having your child do what? Right? Like lay on the tummy and do tummy time crawl and hands and knees crawling. Like, what is this? And so that was a big piece for me to see and understand how the nervous system is formed and developed, and then becomes our behaviors, then becomes our psychology that is creating the meaning for the body sensations.
Mm.
And
I just
as
want to
I,
pause you. I just want to reflect that so people can hear that. Psychology creating the meaning for the body sensations. I love that.
and that's what our brain does best. Like it creates the stories for us to try to understand what we're going through, but it can create the wrong story.
Right, right. And I love that you're bringing in the neurodevelopment piece, because we think of the nervous system and how well it develops or how poorly it develops, or if there's cross wires as it's developing, that these nervous systems are the systems that handle high sensation. So they literally are what allows us to handle life, right? And the connection with the adrenals and the nervous system. I mean, everything's right there about our ability to even show up to people or situations, right?
So I would say that those are pieces that helped inform me, Louise, but it didn't hit until I had my own health crisis.
Okay, tell me about that.
So part of my story is that Miguel did get better. It was 6 very, very long years, Louise. And we went through hell together to get there. And the brief story is that when he got better, I was actually not able to take care of him. I was a single mom, had always been single mom. And at that point, I was now in general surgery residency, and I was on call every third night. I couldn't leave him at my house alone.
How old was he?
He was almost 10 at that point. So 9 turning 10. He had just come through his healing process, right? So yes, like open, receptive, loving, not reacting to the connection now. It was the most amazing thing to see and the most amazing time, Louise, given the contrast, right, of the 6 years
Yeah.
before that.
I love that you said
I mean,
6 years and people are like, I can't change this in a month. Like
uh,
you dedicated 6 years to this developing
yes, I
anew.
do think it could have been faster if I knew then what I know now.
Mm. You're really doing it yourself. You were really kind of
I had to
trial
figure it
and
all out
error.
myself. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I found a family. By that time, I had actually started a nonprofit, and I was teaching other parents how to do the attachment parenting piece, but I still did not have the biology piece yet, Louise. And so one of the families that I had trained, they were at a really good place, and they adopted Miguel. The impact of that was for me, I mean, that's not a straw. That's a big boulder, but it was what took my system over the edge from the years of accumulated stress and trauma that I had been carrying unaware. And I crashed hard. And it was a combination of chronic fatigue, couldn't get out of bed for several months, had to go on a medical leave, did a bunch of tests. That's actually where I found functional medicine, because of all the same things that other people experience when they have those kind of symptoms and go to conventional medicine. And what I started discovering was this interplay between what I now understood as the freeze response, because I had been studying enough of somatic experiencing and polyvagal theory. I understood that, and I now saw my biology and my physical health aligning perfectly with what was happening with the nervous system. And I was like, wait a second, all of these symptoms, all of these conditions are actually directly related to the freeze response. They're directly related to that overwhelm. They're directly related to that dorsal vagal response. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? And so I started to slowly again, like figure things out myself, and started to realize the both the effects of trauma on inflammation and then the effects of inflammation on trauma,
Mm.
until I
Mm.
started to see it all being one system, Luis.
Mhm.
Like it's all one system. You can't separate it. We try to, even the brain and the body, like it's one nervous system.
Yes. Yes. I agree.
And what I discovered through my own trial and error was that, I mean, I know you reached this conclusion long before me, so you're a whiz at this. I had to struggle with it. But
I don't know about that. We'll see. Let's see what we're gonna say first.
what I landed on was that my physical health was simply a manifestation of the dysregulation. It wasn't a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't actually be physically unwell and emotionally well.
Yes. Yes.
And whatever's contributing to that, whether that's the trauma that's causing the symptoms, or the symptoms contributing to the trauma, because it's all one system. You
Yep.
can't separate them. And for me, that's just, that changed everything, because now all of a sudden I knew that I needed to know about my brain health and those concussions that I had had years before. And I
Mm-hmm.
needed to address my gut and the everything, right? Like I found out that I had my autoimmune markers high. Well, that's going to be both as a result and contributing to my tendency to live in this place of chronic freeze.
That's
So
right.
if I want to change my chronic freeze responses, I have to address the biology of that freeze response. It's the same biology, whether we go there because of an emotional trigger or because we go there from a physical internal health trigger.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one biology of the freeze response. There's only one biology of the trauma response.
But see,
And
I love this. Like these kind of conversations light me up because I think for me as well, when I came to that same conclusion, there was this moment of no longer thinking there was something wrong with me. It was
yes,
like, oh, this is a perfect response to everything. It didn't feel good. I wanted to heal it, but
right,
I understood it, right?
exactly.
Your freeze was a perfect response to everything you endured with Miguel and before that, just studying to be a doctor. I mean, come on, like there's so much that happens in the nervous system through those years. So when you understood the freeze response as, okay, this makes sense, and there's a biology to it, what started shifting for you? Was it
Yeah.
nutrition? Was it therapy? Was it all like, oh, where was your next step?
So what changed for me was beginning to piece together the tools that I needed to support my system in whatever state it was in, because it just always seemed like, no, this is what I need to do, and not understanding, no, like my system needs something different when it's in the freeze response, and it needs something different when it's in the stress response, and it needs something completely different when it's in the parasympathetic state.
That's right.
And being able to understand and then bring in intentional support for where it's at right now allowed me, Louise, to make a huge shift in my life. And what had happened up until then was that when I did have a trigger, whatever that trigger was, emotional or physical, eating gluten or answering a phone call that I shouldn't have answered.
I love those two those two sisters right there. Yeah.
Hopefully not both at the same time.
Or one because you did the other.
Exactly. Exactly. Wouldn't have put it past myself at that time though in my life.
I need this donut to be able to talk to mom. Yeah.
And I would start to now notice the symptoms and the sensations that I would have that would tell me that my system had just gone into the freeze response. And it started to always
Mm,
be associated with brain fog. And then I started learning about primed microglia, and that there are things that I can do when those primed microglia are activated. And so it allowed me to go from just kind of feeling helpless when I go into the freeze response and just being like, well, I know this passes with time because the freeze response is on a timed clock. So I know eventually it will come out. Not, I don't feel that way right now, but I know that it will. And I just have to wait it out. Versus now, I started to know what tools to apply, and I changed my freeze response when I first started working on it. Granted, I was really technically in it all the time to a certain degree or not, but it was at least 3 days, 4 days of just feeling like I'm walking in a cloud, and just going through the motions. And then the fog would lift. And with now being able to understand the biology and be able to support the biology, I changed that freeze response down to 2.5 days quite predictable. And so it allowed this huge shift in my life, because of course that was very disruptive to my work, right? When that response would happen, that would be kind of me looking at my calendar and being like, well, for the next 4 days, I'm basically useless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be able to see myself and the power that I had to be able to actually change that, that's like, it hit me on a whole new level, that there's a cellular change that happens with the freeze response. It's
Hmm.
not just emotional or psychological. It is a cellular level, and I can affect what happens at the cellular level.
Yeah. See, what I love about this is I talk a lot about making the unconscious conscious through sensations, right? And so when you're talking about the cellular level freeze, it's very important to me because a lot of us, when we're not embodying trauma response yet, it's just happening to us, right? And sometimes we don't even know until we're out of it. Like you didn't know it was 4 days until you started tracking it. You know, you just kind of feel like it's your life. But when you start getting embodied in the trauma response as it's happening, feeling the shoulders lift, noticing the breath getting shallow, the fog, the for you the brain fog. These are these alerts essentially the body's giving us to say, I'm going into this reflexive place. And so just I'm curious, there's two things I'm curious about. One thing I'm curious about is the way that this biology transforms through our presence with it. I don't know how much you've explored that personally or professionally. It's a lot of what I do. So I'm really curious about that piece. And then the second one is when you talk about affecting it biologically, are you specifically talking about nutrition? Are you talking about supplements? Tell us a bit about that. So we'll start with the relating piece. Your relationship to the state, how much does or does it not transform the biology for you?
Great. And we have about 8 more hours, right?
At
Just
least.
okay.
Let me cancel everything.
Because you just opened up these huge spaces that I love. Like, this is the space that I love to explore, because for one of the things that became conscious for me was my level of presence, Luis.
Mm, hmm.
And I realized that before, I was not really ever present, whether for myself or for other people. I was either in the past or in the future, maybe dissociated, but
Yeah, totally.
never really present. And then, Louise, what happened is that as I started working on the biology and on the cellular level, it was intentionally to be able to increase my capacity for presence.
Yes.
And I talk about this a lot in my 21-day journey, where I'm leading people into their nervous system, walking them through the essential sequence that I've developed for that. And what I tell them is exactly this. And we have 5 agreements. And the first agreement, Louise, the first agreement is we agree to be present to the best degree possible, and for that to be good enough for today. Why?
Mm.
Because tomorrow you're going to have a different level of capacity for presence if you do the work.
So pause right there. I gotta pause you. Yeah, because I love this, and I talk about this so much about capacity and how much it changes by the hour, even, and
The
how
hour.
biological capacity is, right? Based
Yes,
on blood sugar and caffeine and sleeping
exactly.
and the weather. I mean, so many things. So I want people to really hear this because our level of presence with our bodies, with other people, with anything is completely based on capacity, which shifts all the time. And so I just had to pause there and just throw my 2 cents in and just see where you went with that.
Hmm. And I love that we get to have this conversation about like the biology of capacity,
Yes,
the biology of presence. Because again, for me, it then gives me the awareness that I can do something about that.
that's right.
I, I'm not powerless. I'm not just having to take the cards that are dealt me. This is all I can do. It's
That's
like,
right.
no, no, I am doing my best. And I know that today, yeah, there's probably still some things that I can work on, both emotionally, biologically, like everything. But I'm not stuck with the capacity, with my current capacity.
How do
Mhm.
you personally, I know there's a million ways, how do you shift your capacity? How do you build it?
Yeah. So this is, I mean, this is everything that I do, right? This is everything that I teach with the biology of trauma courses. So it's everything that affects the nervous system on a cellular level. So I literally pull up a picture of a neuron and I say, how is my neuron doing today?
Ah,
What can I do to support you today? Oh, you need
mm,
more magnesium? Awesome. Let me give you more magnesium. Oh, you need some zinc and some B6 because for me, I have something that's called pyroluria. Let me give you zinc and B6. Oh, you need some fatty acids because your myelin sheath needs a little. Let me give you some fatty acids. Oh, you need some sauna today. You need some hyperbaric oxygen treatment. Awesome. Let's go do that for you today. So, literally everything that affects us on a cellular level is going to affect our capacity. There's one other thing that has become more important to me as I've studied this cellular level of presence, and that is the oxidative stress
mm,
and the accumulation of oxidative stress. What are the things that accumulate that in the cells? And then what is the downstream effect of that? And what studies seem to be suggesting in my conversation, a recent conversation I had with Dr. William Walsh from the Walsh Research Institute, he is saying that based on what we can uh, see from what's happening inside the nucleus, is that the levels of oxidative stress determine when an epigenetic trigger happens. And PTSD is an epigenetic trigger. It's not just, well, I guess that is just maybe too much or just a
mhm.
luck of the draw. No, like there is actually a very measurable change that happens and it relates to the oxidative stress inside the nucleus. And so for me, that's exciting because then I can come along somebody and I can say, whoa, 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 let's turn this boat around. Let's start reducing your oxidative stress so that we're not even near that line of an epigenetic trigger, whether that's PTSD or whether that's cancer or whether that's any
Mhm.
other epigenetic trigger. But that oxidative stress inside the cells seems to be a really important aspect to our capacity for presence.
What's the relationship with being highly adrenalized and the oxidative stress in the cells? Is there one?
That's a great question. So, what I have been working around is understanding adrenaline versus cortisol and that relationship. And then we've got some other hormones in there, the oxytocin, the vasopressin. And what seems to happen is that adrenaline is what drives the oxidative stress the most. Cortisol is actually supposed to protect us to some degree from that.
Mhm.
But what happens is that when we are, yeah, when we are constantly under that effect of adrenaline, and I'm thinking specifically of like those people who may have the global high intensity
Mhm.
activation type of pattern in their nervous system, even though they are in the freeze response, they still have high adrenaline.
That's right. Even more, I see
Even
because
more,
there's no
exactly.
expression of the adrenaline. It's just building, right?
Yes, yes. There's no outlet. So those are what really becomes toxic and causes a lot of downstream damage, which is why, Luis, the adrenaline and that oxidative stress is what leads to the muscle aches and the
Mm.
symptoms of chronic fatigue
Mhm.
and muscle pains and fibromyalgia. Those conditions are directly related to both the freeze response, but this high adrenaline underneath the freeze response. It's quite fascinating.
It's so important. I just love in my mind as you're talking, I'm also being like, okay, I'm signing up for her course and I'm going to talk to her more often because that what I love about these webs of professionals and colleagues I've been creating over the years is you all give me a different language for what I've already known on some cellular level or a language that adds to a language that I have. And I love this piece right here about the oxidative stress in the nerve cell literally weakens that nerve cell,
Yes.
lowering our capacity, and that adrenalized state creates more oxidative stress. That's so important to me because when we talk all the time in trauma therapy and somatic experiencing world about how when we regulate, we build our capacity. We think, and I often talk about the biology of regulation again, because it's not just like I feel calm, and I'm pointing to my head for those of you listening. It's an actual biology where we have more oxygen because we're breathing deeper. I mean, things shift on the cellular level when we're regulated, which would
Totally.
literally build our capacity based on what you're saying. And I think this is fascinating as well when I think of intergenerational trauma, when you brought up epigenetics, because yeah, one reason why, six people in the family might have diabetes is, a big part of the nutrition. Also, if they're all living and inheriting and reflecting the same trauma responses in environments of the same kind of trauma reenactments, even in family systems, there's also that epigenetic awakening happening, would you say?
Totally. And there's three most common biochemical imbalances that get passed on in families that are contributing to that epigenetic. And obviously, the most important one that we want to talk about when we say epigenetics is methylation. And
Mm,
there are methylation, I call them imbalances, right? And what happens, it's been so fascinating to see that there's been a social shift in methylation. And methylation is, um, for those who may not know that term, it's like if you were walking into a library of books, methylation decides which books you're going to pull off the shelf and read. They're all there.
mhm.
All the books are there. Your whole DNA is there. But which ones actually get read? Now that's controlled by methylation, which is considered epigenetics. And those patterns get passed on. And there's been this huge shift in the last several decades towards what's called undermethylation.
Mm,
And that causes more oxidative stress. And so
mm.
literally the oxidative stress load is part of what's being passed on in generational trauma.
That's amazing because I go right to B12 and such, and I think that means people are having these low levels of B12 absorption, which is completely destroying the myelin sheath, right?
That, but it's also a lot to do with folate, Luis.
Folate, right,
Mhm.
right,
And what
methylfolate.
what happens, unfortunately, right now is that the clinical practice has not kept up with the research, and so anybody with a methylation imbalance, which most of them are being diagnosed with that through their genetics, like a 23andMe, and being like,
Mhm.
oh, you have this SNP, or the single nucleotide polymorphism, and so you need to be on this. And they give them B12, but they also give them folate. For a person who is an undermethylator, that is the one of the worst things you can give them, because it's actually going to drive their serotonin activity low and increase their glutamate activity, which is a cause of release of adrenaline.
Yep,
And so they get more agitated, and internally they just feel more restless, and
because they
it's,
can't absorb it properly.
they're not utilizing it appropriately. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that folate is a um, does affect the DNA and which genes get read. And so that is one of the reasons why it causes those changes in the neurotransmitter levels that then those have downstream effects.
wow, it's amazing. I mean, so just even this snippet you're giving us is just really showing us the chemical load on the body of an adrenalized traumatized system. And it just keeps reinforcing my life work right now and my own practices around uh I mean, again, your phrase, your tagline, the biology of trauma, you really can't think or talk your way out of trauma. It's a biology that you have to actually respond to. And okay, so this is where I'm going to get back to my other question. How cellular, or how cellularly transformative is it to have presence with yourself? Because there's so many studies about how much the cells transform and oxidative stress lowers with self-presence and mindfulness. What's your personal or professional experience around just presence with the trauma response? Even pretend we have no supplements or anything involved. Tell me about that.
I'm going to come back to capacity, Luis, because your capacity determines how much you actually can be present with your trauma responses and not get overwhelmed by them.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
So it takes practice,
Mhm.
but that's what I see in my groups, in the courses that I do, right? Like we do a little bit every day for 21 days.
Mhm.
The people coming into my courses are used to therapists telling them like, all right, we're going to meet for an hour, or we're going to do a whole weekend retreat.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
And I'm like, we're going to do things differently here. Like,
Mhm.
because we are going to create an experience for ourselves that we are building that ability to be present with our trauma responses and not get overwhelmed by it, because otherwise we're just perpetuating the trauma response.
That's right. I love that.
So
And it's, even when you say that, I hear there's also a perpetuation of the trauma reenactment with like relational
exactly.
ruptures within the
Yes.
self, right?
Yes.
That's
Yes. And that's
brilliant.
exactly what we're trying to shift.
Exactly, exactly. Well, so I have a course that most people listening have either taken or know. And week two, we do nutrition. And the reason why we do nutrition in week two is because all the things we go into later in the course, they demand a certain level of capacity to feel what comes up. And if we didn't do the nutrition, we wouldn't give people a chance to actually have the resource to feel what comes
Exactly.
up in that. Because
Yep.
what's happening in those states, these sensational moments where you're with a trauma response, you're with a huge amount of adrenaline and you're with the
Huge.
memory of threat. So you
Yes.
really have to have like something in place to hold that with you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's in the 21-day journey that I lead people through, that third week for me is expansion and growth. And I tell them at the beginning of that week, don't do these exercises until you have been able to gain the tools to feel safe in your body and to feel supported, which is what I cover in week one. And then in week two, because just like what you say, when you start to open yourself up to any expansion, whether that's an expansion of your capacity, expansion to joy, expansion to fear, to anger, we've got to have the tools to be able to hold it and stay with it, stay
Mm-hmm.
present. Otherwise, we're just reenacting that, yep, this is too much for me. Yep, this is too much. And we've got to shift that. So what I have found is that I don't want to work with someone's biology until they've been able to gain some of these somatic tools that are very basic somatic tools. And then I bring in the biology and then we work with them side by side. And as
Mm-hmm.
I work with their biology, I see their capacity for the somatic work increase.
Mm-hmm.
And as their capacity and as they do the somatic work, their capacity to do the biology piece increases.
That's
And
right.
so it's constantly like this pacing of our capacity as we grow it. And what I love about the body is that the body just always shows us what it is ready for next.
That's so beautiful. Even when you say it shows us, it's something that I say so many times in my work of how much I want something to transform or shift. The body's going to do it when it's ready. My job is to give it what it needs and stay present with it until it does that shift, right?
Yes. Like that was a beautiful expression of everything I've been trying to say, but you can just say it so much more beautifully, Luis.
After I heard you say it for 40 minutes. Well, what's interesting about this though is it's just kind of like all these languagings and certificates and degrees. It's all these ways that we're just really saying your body knows best. Your body actually knows how to do this. We're just teaching people how to listen to the language of their body, something that we've lost, that we've had, for tens of thousands of years, but over the last several hundred years have lost touch of. So it's kind of like really a reconnecting and repairing the rupture, right?
Totally. It
Culturally,
is.
even from the
Yes.
body.
It is that repairing the rupture of the relationship and the
Yeah.
communication. And for me, it was so important to be able to understand so that then I could step into that repair.
Mm.
Otherwise, if I didn't understand what my system was doing, I just continued to feel frustrated and
Hmm.
overwhelmed by it. And understanding and being able to see, like, oh, it's doing that because it's supposed to do that.
That's
Oh,
right. That's right.
oh, it's doing that because I pushed it over the edge. Oh,
Yes. Yes.
got it. Okay, now we can have a very different relationship. And rather than trying to push my body more and feeling like my body is betraying me because I want it to perform at a higher level, whether
Yes.
physically, emotionally, mentally, and the capacity is not there.
Yeah.
Now it's like, yeah, I can see that and I can see why. And let me meet you where you are, give you what you need.
Mm.
And when you're ready, you'll let me know when you're ready for the next step and show me what that is.
I have to highlight that. Let me meet you where you are. It's just such a beautiful thing to say to the body. Because we tell people to say that to their children, and a lot of people wish the parents said that to them. And how transformative is it, even for those of you listening right now, just to literally look at your body and say, let me meet you where you are. I always liken somatic work and building of capacity to going to a gym and lifting weights. Like, you can't walk in and bench. I can't bench 100 now, but you can walk in and bench, 100 pounds if you haven't trained to get there. And it's the same with building capacity. Where are you right now? And what's the capacity? Start there. And then it just starts naturally building when it's ready to. And it's really self-love. Like we're talking about the biology of self-love, essentially, right? Like this connection.
It is. And that's where, for a lot of people, when they start to open themselves to this, I see them experiencing a lot of grief for how they have not loved themselves.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. I think that's the most, I feel it in my heart when you say it. It's the most touching part for me when I do the groups, when I do my courses, and I just see these faces and the tears streaming as they realize I didn't give this to myself and now I can. And there's this kind of like inner reckoning that happens.
Yes.
And it's
That
powerful.
is healing on a cellular level.
Thank you, because that's really how I see it too. That's where even the family relational ruptures start healing. Like example, if my mother didn't have space for my emotions, wow, I haven't either. I'm doing to myself what she did to me, and this incredible repair starts happening. It just blows my mind every time. I,
And that
I'm
for me is like so much of this, then kind of being able to see that, yes, even though the brain really makes the stories and the meaning from our body sensations, the mind does play a role in shifting that physiology and that biology down to a more parasympathetic state.
I couldn't agree more with that, because I think when our consciousness is moving through the mind, there's this co-regulator with the body, that witnesser. And that's a huge part of, for me, for the building capacity somatically, is that I'm able to witness this state rather than get swallowed in it and identify with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, which is kind of what I love about your work, Luis, is that you're not disconnecting the mind in order to just work with the body.
That's right. Yeah,
Like
that's right.
you're using the mind and just using it to bring attention to the body to make that unconscious be able to be conscious.
That's exactly right. Thank you for seeing that. This has been a great, easy, beautiful conversation. We could talk for 8 hours. There's no question. If I ever come to San Diego, we're gonna talk for 8 hours.
Absolutely.
Let's like hang out in your beautiful wherever you are, over those trees. I just want to know, as we close, what would you like people to know about, upcoming events, or how to work with you, or how to orient themselves to what you offer?
Yeah, and thank you. I would be more than happy to have people come check out the biology of trauma modules. And I start with that 21-day journey just so that we can have the same language and the same experience then going into addressing the biology. And and then we're doing the attachment and neurodevelopment module starting in October. And then in January, I'm starting with the biology of the freeze response and overwhelm, and then go the rest of the year through all of the different biologies that are really have been essential for me for rewiring my system on that
Mhm.
cellular level.
Love it. Well, I'm definitely going to be in one of those. I'm excited. I'm
Ah,
taking
yay.
taking
Ah,
some time
that
to do
makes me so
some.
happy. I'm super excited about it now.
It feels so good. It's like you speak my language and then some, and I went the and then some. So I'm excited for that. So thank you for your work. It's just so beautiful. What's your website so they can find
Yeah,
you?
people can find us over at traumahealingaccelerated.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Aimie Aigian. I'm happy you're my colleague and becoming my friend. It's really cool.
Absolutely, Louise. Thank you so much.
Take care.